Thank you so much for joining. Today is one of my personally favorite topics, the enterprise blockchain solutions. My name is Peter Borovykh. I myself, senior consultant at Blockchain Driven, and what we do is we consult governments, large corporations, startups on the implementation of blockchain, and there are definitely some conflicts in terms of ideas and in terms of thinking regarding how those blockchain solutions must be implemented. Part of the reasons why, when I was featured on the show previously, I was kind of going on behalf of Fraud and AI. The reason for that is because majority of blockchain projects, when it comes down to enterprise, do have very weird difficulties associated with implementing those solutions. Some of those difficulties are associated with political situations inside corporations or governments. Some have to deal with lack of funding. Some have to deal with lack of proper structures, etc. So we have a great number of experts today that would go over their view on the blockchain enterprise solutions nowadays, what the status of that, what the progress of that, and what their views on. I prepared some very critical and interesting and definitely challenging questions to make it interesting. So if possible, let's do the following. So whenever somebody speaks, everybody else, let's please try to mute the microphone, either through the feature on the thingy or through, like, I have this special hardware, which is like a cool thing. In any case, let's start. I see you guys in a certain order. So maybe we should start with Brian, just to introduce yourself first. What do you do specifically? And then I'll be just calling the names. Brian, then Radhika, and then Xenia, and then etc. Let's go.
Sure. Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Brian J. Esposito. Over the last 20 years, I've built a holding company. As of the end of last month, there's 61 entities in it, with over 150 joint ventures around the world. So we've become basically industry agnostic at this point, with a very heavy influence over blockchain and cryptocurrencies technologies.
That was very brief. Radhika?
I can keep going. I don't know the list of questions, so I want to make sure we have enough time.
Keep going if you like, Brian.
As it relates to blockchain and that world, one of our holdings is a company called Nodal. We've become the world's largest wireless IoT network, all on our proprietary blockchain technology and cryptocurrency, known as Nodal Cash behind the scenes. We are extremely privacy focused. We believe you own your own data. And with that, we've also rolled out the Coalition Network, a privacy focused and privacy must contact tracing app. We've partnered with Avnet, a public Fortune 200 company, for an enterprise solution known as the Nodal M1, to get people back to work safely and anonymously track infected patients that have an infected disease. Therefore, we can report back 15 days where that device may have been in close contact to other employees, and anonymously contact and notify those employees if they have been in close proximity. The end result of something like that is the idea that we don't have to shut down an entire office building. We don't have to shut down an entire factory. If one infected employee is only in close proximity of 3 people out of maybe 2,000 people at a meat packing warehouse or a processing center, that facility can stay open and just let those other people notified to be staying home, monitored, and tested.
That sounds pretty interesting. That leads me to the next question, but first of all, intros. Radhika, please.
Yep.
So I'm Radhika Iyengar. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today, again, speaking about my 2 favorite topics, enterprise blockchain and healthcare. I'm a TEDx speaker, Silicon Valley Woman of Influence. I'm also a member of the California GovOps Blockchain Working Group, working with the state legislature of California and Governor Gavin Newsom, and author of the book, Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived, which was published Q4 last year.
There we go.
Can
we buy this in bookstores?
Yes, available on Amazon.
Nice. Very good.
So my co-author and I wrote this because we really didn't see what we think was lacking, which was a comprehensive guide to enterprise blockchain.
Yeah.
And it covers multiple sectors, including blockchain, and especially in healthcare, right? So in any event, what am I up to these days? I'm a founding partner at StarChain Ventures. We're a venture studio based in Silicon Valley. We are spinning up some new companies and working on projects and co-creating with other companies as well. So really happy to be here on this program, and take it away.
Perfect. Xenia?
Hi everyone, my name is Xenia. I'm the founder of It We're a strategic communications consultancy and PR for companies, for fintech and digital asset companies. My expertise in this field coming from monitoring the market on a weekly basis. We have a newsletter dedicated to digital securities, and I also have a podcast together with my twin sister that is called Value Tokenized. In the course of a year and a half, we interviewed over 100 experts in this space. So I would say me channeling some expertise that I was lucky to witness myself through all these conversations that I had during the past over 2 years. That's my focus. I'm really happy to be here and looking forward to this discussion.
Perfect. Manny?
Hi, everybody. I'm Manny Alicandro. I'm an attorney in New York. I'm also very happy to be part of this panel. Thank you. I focus on blockchain and cryptocurrency and digital assets. I also have an MBA, so I have a lot of interest in data and blockchain more of as a technology and as a utility. Prior to practicing law for my own practice, I worked at NASDAQ. I was in-house counsel at NASDAQ. I worked at JP Morgan, and I was also general counsel of a hedge fund. So I have about 30 years of Wall Street capital markets experience that I bring to bear in terms of comparing and contrasting where I think things are going in the blockchain space, particularly with a lot of the uses of similar trading tools, in particular where, let's say, high frequency trading or various aspects of trading that have been implemented in the traditional capital markets that have worked well and made a lot of money, that are very transparent, moving in that direction in terms of the digital asset space. In addition, I have a show on a platform called Flix.net, Flixx.net. It's called Manny's Point of View. And as Xenia mentioned, I interviewed her earlier today with her sister. It was great. So looking forward to really getting into some interesting conversation tonight. Thank you.
Perfect, Manny. Thank you. And Harumi?
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. My name is Harumi Urata-Thompso, and I have started as a very traditional. I have started in a very traditional finance field as an investment banker, trading derivatives and then doing the M&A. But very early on, I discovered the technology and moved over to what we call the fintech side of the industry. All these names like artificial intelligence and fintech, all these followed me. So I'm saying that I'm just setting the trend in this field. Whenever I kind of like joke around about my career. Anyway, so because I began to get involved in all these what we call emerging technologies today, it was just a matter of time for me to discover blockchain as well, which I did as part of. Actually getting ready to start my own consulting firm years after I left from investment banking, started on the technology side and whatnot. So as a consultant, I got to be involved everything from a startup to central bank, and I had a very interesting experience doing that. Right now, I'm providing my full-time service at the Celsius Network. Doing the crypto unbank the bank.
Unbanking the banks.
Yeah.
So we got all kinds of different calibers. Thank you so much, everybody, for the intros. We got all kinds of different calibers. We got influencers, we got Wall Street people, we got healthcare people. So my first question to everybody is this. It's a very uneasy question. There is a great, in my personal opinion, great misunderstanding regarding what enterprise blockchain solutions are, what spectrum these solutions could take. And due to that misunderstanding, there's a huge lag of blockchain implementation across the board, despite billions of dollars being spent by banks, healthcare organizations, governments, and so on and so forth. And the reason for that is the architecture with which they begin to implement those solutions is wrong in the first place. So it's a very challenging question. I'll probably disagree with most of you, hopefully not. But what is a blockchain solution for an enterprise is from the perspective of the architecture? And you guys can just start taking away.
I do think that, even before we talk about what is enterprise blockchain, I think blockchain itself needs to be really fully understood. I mean, what it is at the end of the day is a database, right? So it's a very a robust database. It's a very robust spreadsheet. If you want to really kind of distill it to that level, although I wouldn't quite call it that, but because the name blockchain and then several sort of different use cases that came out of it at the very beginning, the people who got in the blockchain early on made it, I think, very much more complicated, difficult than I think what should have been. And sort of this buzz thing began to go around the blockchain and made other people feel like it's something that I need to understand, but I don't quite understand. I have heard of something called Bitcoin. I don't know if I'm supposed to touch. I don't know. So I think, fundamentally, I think it goes to that as a starter, even before we talk about enterprise blockchain. And then I think we have a person, who wrote the enterprise blockchain book here. So I'm not going to sort of go into the definition of enterprise blockchain right at this moment, since we have to go around the circle. But I want to start with that I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding that it's something really, really, really complicated. Most of the people don't understand. I will never touch it. Unless I understand it, I will never touch it. So I think I want to start with that.
So pretty much problems with UX that have been the problems for the last 2 years, right? So the blockchains, the successful permissionless blockchains such as Bitcoin and Ethereum are potentially pretty development heavy, and there needs to be some change for the UX to make it more friendly. That's pretty much the case. Radhika, I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, so a little bit of a different perspective from Harumi. I think to simplify it to a very special database is not really correct, in my opinion, because databases typically, as we know it from the Web 2.0 world, are centralized and one owner essentially to the database. We're really talking about some multiple differentiating factors, which all go to the why of blockchain. If we're really looking from the transition between Web 2.0 into the new Web 3.0, there's some fundamental issues that come up, and really you look at why blockchain. And so, the internet has taken us as a technology only so far. And it was a communication protocol at the end of the day, and it's done that really, really well. But the limitations of mutability, of centralization, of, I would say, lack of security, these are things that have really brought about the why of blockchain. So to Harumi's point, not really just a database, it's something that has multi-party transactions happening. Transparency across multiple parties, and that database, so to speak, is contributed to, perhaps even owned by, if you're looking at consortia, with multiple parties. And so there's a multi-party factor, which is really a differentiator. But if you look at what blockchain really is, I mean, you're talking about some driving transformative qualities that I think are really unique and special about blockchain: the immutability, the security, decentralization, open source, of course, which has been around for a while. And then there's tokenization aspect, incentivization aspects to blockchain, which are so important. And then there are other ancillary sort of components that are not necessarily part of the technology as such, but really make it even more robust from an enterprise perspective. So you're looking at things like identity and privacy, confidentiality. These are things that are so central to enterprises. So if you look at architecture, back to your point, Peter, I think you're looking at something that is, and what has been more established in enterprise already in terms of use cases with blockchain has been on the permission side. So unlike most people talking about public versus private, I like to think of it more as permissionless versus permissioned. And I think permissioned architectures for blockchain have become quite the norm in enterprise applications. And we've already seen a plethora of very scalable, robust systems that have already been developed and have been adopted by large banks, for example, large institutions, major corporations that have all gone in, and these consortia as well that are industry focused have also seen the proliferation of such systems. So I just wanted to add a little bit and differentiate a little bit to what Harumi was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So pretty much we're talking about public versus private, just to educate everybody who's watching us right now. This is who can view the data, who can write the data. When it comes down to permissionless permission, this is in response to the validators who can actually validate those transactions. When it comes down to B2B and enterprise solutions, and for the most part, the main confusion comes from the perspective of public versus private, while it should have really been permissionless versus permissioned. And I see the same thing, Radhika. Brian?
Yeah, I would just add to that the other important factor is the processing power on the enterprise side. And as far as that permission and authorization of what those rules are to be in an enterprise blockchain environment. Other than that, Radhika really hit on everything that I was like wanting to jump in there with and say. And the fun part about working with the enterprise clients and some of our solutions is the security side. We have a PKI where we can issue those certificates to initially distribute a digital signature on who's viewing that content, what device is accessing that blockchain, or what services that's being rendered. So the security side, I think, is the most important play in this space, and whoever can come in and initiate that certificate on the fly to protect that device, and in a lot of our use cases, it's the IoT device. They're always broadcasting out, and they're always looking to touch and connect with something. So when you have a blockchain with transparency with a PKI overlay, you really can create an incredible enterprise solution that I think everybody needs.
I also think, if I can jump in, that blockchain is interesting, that it's probably like the first technology stack that really has an internal economic model built in with a certain incentive. So it's interesting how it can be applied. And to the point of private versus public blockchains, really funny, interesting argument that we're hearing from blockchain space, that private blockchain is not a blockchain. So it's something different. And it's also would be interesting to discuss it further today. So that's what I wanted.
Can I just quickly jump in on that, Xenia, because I think you brought up a really important misunderstanding. I think when people talk about private versus public, that's why I really don't like private versus public, because I think of it more as permission versus permissionless. But in the private blockchain, I mean, it's not truly private. It doesn't belong to one company. Private to me is a misnomer, because private to me implies one company, and blockchain is not one company, one entity. It's multiple entities, and that's the whole ethos of blockchain, is to have multiple entities, right? So when I hear about private blockchain is not really blockchain, I say, you're right, because it really isn't a private thing at all. It's multiple parties, multiple entities that participate in the system, in the network. And so the very ethos of blockchain is anything but private in that sense. The privacy aspect, I would say, comes about in enterprise systems where confidentiality of information is so sacrosanct, if you will. And so permissioned architectures have been developed to preserve a lot of that privacy and confidentiality, which is so central to enterprise systems. I just wanted to throw that.
Guys, before we jump to Manny, sorry for this. Radhika, could you please elaborate on the fact that I fully agree with everything you have to say so far. Lots of solutions are claiming, lots of private permission solutions are claiming that they can do proper architectures between multiple parties that are totally independent of each other, right? So that not departments within one organization. What can you say in response to that?
Well, there are multiple architectures. I mean, look at Hyperledger, for example, which is a fairly well-developed system, which allows for, it is a permissioned architecture. It has different components and modules with it, but it's definitely something that is adopted by enterprise because it does preserve confidentiality and privacy. There's R3, which has developed Corda, and Corda is also a very strong system that also preserves privacy and confidentiality, and incorporates ZKP in that sense as well. So that is an added component for privacy. So you do have multiple architectures. And I think, with the Ethereum side, I mean, you've got, well, now that they're part of the Hyperledger network as well, they've got Besu, and they've got, they've got very newer sort of things that they're working on as well. So I think there's multiple architectures, multiple systems that do address this privacy and confidentiality bit, which is so central for enterprise. As I said, it cannot be something that is truly permissionless in that sense. You are seeing somewhat of the hybrid architectures also coming into play, where the back end might be permissioned and then the front end might be permissionless, that is more customer facing or consumer facing. So you can see some hybrid models already starting to come about. I don't know if that's kind of along the lines of what you were talking about.
And Manny, the original question was, which took place 20 minutes ago. What is blockchain? What is the definition of a blockchain architecture for enterprise solutions from your perspective?
So, I'll answer the question in a kind of unique way, right? So I think the term blockchain has been somewhat hijacked. In terms of it's kind of like a cool term, and you have people who maybe had a bad project that didn't work, and then we're going to adopt blockchain technology, and magically it's going to make it better. So, how I view blockchain is, I can't do better than Radhika and everybody else in terms of the benefits of it. But what I think is interesting are really two fundamental things that I think we should talk about, right? One is how you marry a blockchain with the law and regulations. So it only works as well as you have limitations or prohibitions based upon the law and based upon regulations. So particularly in healthcare and particularly in financial services, you have this brick wall effectively of regulations which determine what you have to do and how you do it. Problematically, a lot of these laws went into effect many, many years ago, right? So the laws have not kept up with technological advancement. So we're talking about great technology, immutability, transparency, the whole thing, but nonetheless, where is the adoption? Things are only as good as they're utilized and there's mass adoption. You have mass adoption usually because it's either mandated by law or it's because people have an incentive, right? So you have to look at mass adoption in terms of incentivization. And I think we're not there yet. For example, the Depository Trust Corporation, they have been doing a lot of work with blockchain for years, right? But they have a monopoly on settlement and clearance of securities. So if they go to blockchain and let's say they go to straight through processing or whatever, they're essentially disrupting their own monopoly that they have a governmental right to maintain. So what is their incentive to disrupt what they do? And they do it well. Could they do it better? Would it be better if they adopted full-on blockchain technology? Absolutely. But at the same time, they're not incentivized. So what to me is the challenge of this industry is a lot of the incentivization, a lot of the disruption and the disintermediators are third parties that are trying to crash through and crash through the gate. And the large organizations, they have blockchain projects and whatnot. But to me, I think a lot of them are kind of skunks works. Like they're trying to figure out how we need to keep up with blockchain technology. But at the end of the day, are they really incentivized? Is JP Morgan really incentivized to move forward in blockchain technology? It's debatable. Is DTC? I would argue no. They're in no rush to do it. Will they get there? Yes. Are they in a rush to get there? I doubt it because they're making money and they're the most important aspect of clearance and settlement because they are clearance and settlement. So again, going back to me, the issues that we're struggling with are mass adoption and the resistance from the law and regulations against how can we implement blockchain technology in certain aspects that are heavily regulated and have a lot of prohibitions around the use of data, for example.
So many, if there are rough mistakes when it comes down to architectures to begin with by these large corps, what the incentive is just because some regulator is a daddy, quote, as I call them, and the daddy forces everybody to play the game. Why are these corporations still spending millions, if not billions of dollars
Can
aside
we-
from the fact to just persuade the shareholders that they're actually doing some innovation. Why are they doing this?
Peter,
Why-
actually, could I possibly take a swag at that? Because I think, Manny, you brought up some really great points, but I think it depends on the regulatory side, what you're looking at. Actually, in healthcare, in food and ag, we're seeing regulatory tailwind, right? You've got the FDA that is already engaged with various pilots that have already shown some really great promising results, and to the point that FDA is basically saying it's not that they're requiring blockchain as a technology, but they're really saying that you have to get to the bottom of transparency in supply chains, for example, trying to solve some very fundamental issues that current legacy technology doesn't solve. And so if you're really talking about being able to correctly solve transparency across an entire supply chain where you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parties, where you need visibility and auditability across that supply chain, you've got nothing better than blockchain as a technology being able to solve that. So the entities like FDA, for example, are hugely behind this. They're saying, they're big proponents of this. So in terms of implementations in the food and ag supply chains, for example, you've got Walmart, that's one of the biggest retail giants, being an advocate for this. You've got Frank Yanis, who came out of Walmart, is now with the FDA, saying and recognizing that this technology is really something worthwhile, that it is very much solving some fundamental issues that cannot be solved with other systems, for example. So that's one thing. On the pharma side, we're also seeing regulatory tailwind. We've got the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, which was passed in 2013, which requires compliance by 2023. All of the pharmaceutical manufacturers, the biggest ones, are involved in blockchain-based consortia. So I think the power of consortia, where you have hundreds of parties that can come together in an industry fashion, be able to share key pieces of information and data across that network to improve transparency, auditability. That kind of shareability is just not possible. So I'm glad you brought up the subject of regulatory issues. I don't always see that the regulatory issues are a challenge. I think that sometimes the regulatory issues or the regulatory bodies really embrace something and recognize the potential of something. And we're already seeing that, I think, in pharma. We're seeing that in healthcare, where certain aspects to that data are so central to what we need to do with that industry, that blockchain and then the ancillary pieces like identity or privacy are things that are upheld. So I think that's on the one hand. On the other side, I think the consortia and the interactions of multiple parties, hundreds of parties being able to come together, that's really what the corporations want. They want to be able to engage where this is a brand new way of doing business. It's really disruptive because you're able to sit across the virtual table with your supplier, with your vendor, with your competitor, and be able to share key pieces of information that helps everybody across that network, right?
But Radhika, so when it comes down to healthcare, it's again in healthcare. I'm working specifically on a big startup blockchain implementation for cardio industry, and there are two main applications for healthcare. It's, one has to do with private data, patient data. The other has to do with logistics, and patient data is completely lagging behind. It will never happen. It seems like, well, not in the US. Logistics is happening very fast. Manny, going back to the question regarding, and then after this, we're going to jump to Brian. Going back to the question, why those large corps are still doing this, despite the fact that architectures are crap to begin with?
I just don't think they have the incentive. One, they need to spend money, and money's tight. Two, a lot of the architecture at a lot of the firms is a lot of bubblegum and Scotch tape. Okay, there's a lot of legacy systems. If you work at an investment bank, that investment bank acquired other smaller banks throughout the course of time. They keep a lot of the same systems simply for the fact that there are a lot of customers that, let's say, are high net worth individuals that come in a certain way, trade a certain way, clear a certain way, and they don't want to upset the apple cart. So that they're not incentivized to do it, but absolutely would tremendously benefit from spending so much money, wasting so much money on these legacy systems that are slow, problematic, poorly architected. But again, I don't see a regulatory mandate. The regulations are you need to comply with these laws and these requirements. However you do that and you create this transparency in terms of your books and records and auditability, and the regulators come in, good for you. I think the problem too is that Wall Street has grown so quickly in terms of the volumes of Wall Street that it's kind of like fixing the subway in New York. When it's a 24-hour system, you need to shut it down to actually fix it. And the volumes of Wall Street, particularly during COVID, have been unprecedented. And it's working for the most part. Can it be better? Absolutely. But again, I don't see the incentive. So one of the things I just wanted to mention where I feel that blockchain is difficult, and you mentioned it in terms of personal identifiable information, particularly in healthcare. I mean, I would love the classic use case of my records being able to be transported with me if I go to China, and all my medical records are on the chain. I will make sure I don't say private, public, permissionless, which I think is fair. But I mean, I think that's going to be a challenge because of HIPAA, right? So you got this big backstop in HIPAA, and then secondly, with regard to brokerage firms, with regard to banks, and they have so much personal information. Right, a big deal right now is swapping SIM card hacks, stealing people's information. So right now, from the governmental perspective, it's really to contain that information, control the dissemination of that information, put everything in a container. So to the extent blockchain is implemented, fantastic. Again, I just unfortunately don't see it happening, and I clearly don't see it happening. The Trump administration really hasn't been behind Bitcoin at all, really, with blockchain. And if Trump gets reelected or Biden wins, I can't see any impetus to change things from that.
We heard the opposite. We heard quite the opposite, to be honest, from the presidentials. So all right. So far, the conclusion goes like this: lots of companies get it wrong for whatever reason. They're still doing this because they need to show that they're super innovative. And the subway was shut down here in New York City, and it's still crap. So nothing happened, nothing changed. So the only way is just to pretty much build a new system. So now, Brian, let's go with my next challenging question. Well, the next one is not really challenging, unfortunately. But so what are you working on specifically when it comes down to enterprise solutions, and why first of all, maybe talk about one of the use cases, if you can disclose them, and if you can, would be very interesting to see why you selected a specific architecture. The reason why I'm going towards architectures is because I do not want this panel to turn into another bullshit conversation about nothing that happened for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, my pleasure. One quick point on the last question. A lot of companies have to save face and say they're always working on innovative things. I think the biggest issue from my experience on that is the CFOs and accountants in these companies, especially the public ones that we work with, they're afraid to touch it. They're afraid that how do you book these on their balance sheet? What are the SEC regulations? So they have to do a catch-22. Yeah, we're working on it. We're putting money towards it. And I think you're going to see a giant shift once regulation is lifted and it becomes a regulated SEC process where now they can tokenize those blockchains. They can book them on their balance sheet. And it can help add value to their stocks. So I just wanted to touch on that. That's what I see in the companies that we work with. Back to what I mentioned early on, Nodal has become one of my most precious companies to work with. That company and what they've done over the last 2 years in building a giant global wireless IoT network. We were the first blockchain and cryptocurrency company on the first crypto cell phone from HTC, the Exodus. So the whole idea of you owning your own data and making sure that your data is not sold off, it is not sent out and sold to anybody they possibly can. We were way ahead of the curve on. We're going to find a way to monetize you without letting anybody know who you are. So because we built this giant network, we're connecting over 100 million unique IoT devices a day, and all this through your mobile phone and through our SDK built into our app partners. And the use case, like I mentioned before, based on this tech, is the idea that we have a privacy-focused contact tracing app that should be rolled out everywhere. We've built a solution. We're working directly with a public company like Avnet. They understand blockchain. They understand the idea of how to monetize it correctly, how to protect enterprise employees, and get people back to work as safely and quickly as possible. I don't think we're ever going to see an idea that people dive and hit the floor when somebody sneezes. So this is the new norm that we have to deal with. And because people are so afraid and what the media has done to everybody, and people are even afraid to hold doors for people. So that's going to take a long time to fix that. We are scared of one another. I do love the fact that we're with our families, and we're understanding what the simple things in life are more important. But as you have to get back to work, you need to have something in place to properly protect these people. So having the use case like Nodal
so interrupt. How exactly does it work? So who are the participants of the chain? What does the blockchain do exactly?
So it's anonymously tracking a device. So our network connects to this device. The device is called the Nodal M1. That is in partnership with Avnet. So they're our manufacturing distribution partner. They have over 3 million, nearly 3 million business clients. So they're a perfect partner to get people back to work as quickly as possible. And then the HR department on that private network would ping a device that becomes hot because their employee has an infectious disease, whether it's COVID-19, COVID-20, COVID-21, whatever is the future that we have at hand. And then through our network and through the blockchain and our technology, it will notify every other device in close proximity of that hot device. So now you know when you can contain properly and as quickly as possible a potential outbreak. And we think that is going to allow to stop the spread of this, to do it correctly without giving away any personal identification of who that person is, but allowing people to know that, hey, this device it has an infected mark on it. Every other device that was in close proximity gets pinged. They now know they have to monitor themselves. They need to get tested, or they need to stay home from work. Therefore, that company can stay open. Those machines can continue to produce goods. And only the people that were near that infected person are now notified that they need to stay home.
Understood. And what are the incentives? Well, except for the fact that you'll be fired if you don't have that device on you as an employee. What are some incentives for users to join? And what architecture are you using? Is it public permissionless one? You mentioned that it's a native one, but which blockchain should you take as an inspiration?
Oh, it's a proprietary blockchain. We were building this on the Stellar network, and then we shifted off, and Nodal now has its own proprietary blockchain. But the incentive is, I wouldn't say someone can get fired, but they probably are going to get furloughed or not told to come to work. We don't put those on the user. That comes from the HR new policies that are put into the handbook. So we would not say any of those rules. That would come from the enterprise company or the client.
Understood.
Can I just add to that, Brian? I think it's really exciting that you're working on this kind of a Nodal platform. There are a few other companies too doing similar things. I think the short news is that I think COVID, while it's been very challenging on so many different levels, it's also accelerating innovation and adoption in ways that we couldn't have imagined prior to COVID. So I think that's the really good silver lining to that cloud, if you will. But and the MIT-based project Safe Paths, you probably have heard about that. They're working with the Clinic, and they're working with the WHO, and I think they're working with CDC as well. They also have a privacy-preserving contact tracing app. So I think you might want to exchange information or share. I'm happy to put you in touch with those folks.
Oh, thank you.
But also there's verifiable credentials. I think that is really hot right now, just in terms of how do you reintegrate a workforce post-COVID? How do you prove that you either had it? Have you had the right antibodies to develop? I mean, we're still learning about that. This is novel coronavirus, called that for a reason, because there's things we still don't understand about it in terms of immunity and immunization, and what does that mean to build a vaccine for this? So, but as we go forward, I think verifiable credentials is going to be a critical component of that. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And I don't know if that's an aspect of Nodal that you're already working on, is verifiable credentials. But I know a few companies here in the Valley that are working on that piece of the solution as well. And then to Manny's point on regulatory bodies, I'm really proud to be a member of the California GovOps Blockchain Working Group, and we are working very actively with state legislature on this. Our initial report is coming out in July, so it's not that far away. We've been working on it actively since last September. And AB 2004, for example, is a bill that is all about verifiable credentials in part. And so we really are looking at this from a state level and making recommendations to state legislature on what kinds of regulations will be able to support the new innovations that will come about, particularly as we go forward into a post-COVID era where certain things like privacy and anonymity of
right, Radhika, but it's not about the regulations. I mean, regulations. It's great to assume that the government will. Spoke to Jeff Wernick yesterday. Agree with him. Governments don't really add much innovation. I mean, the fact that government will pass yet another regulation is not going to change anything because the system's not broken.
I disagree with you because I think that the role of government, good government, is really to institute the types of policies that are beneficial to the right kinds of innovation. So,
if the system is not broken,
for example,
but if the system is not broken, then it's not going to be fixed. I fully agree with Manny, and we've seen this already in the banking industry. Let's switch to Harumi for a second. So, Celsius, huge company. Obviously, all of us know about this. What are you guys doing there specifically? You started as a P2P lending, during the ICO. Then it was a huge pivot towards something else. So would you please educate all of us what you guys are doing specifically and how are you using blockchain over there? That's a specific, useful, actual use case.
Well, okay, it's actually in that sense, I think Celsius Network is an interesting company because that is in the center of a lot of different blockchains. I mean, we have now listed 26 different coins. A couple of them might be coming from the same institutions, the entities, but otherwise, basically, we're talking about dealing with 20 plus different entities that have their own communities and their own tokens. And obviously, there are some coins that we don't even know where they really came from, right? I mean, namely the first couple. So it's sort of like, in a way, a sort of decentralized banking service that is serving decentralized communities plus more, so that they can actually earn and benefit out of this very, very decentralized infrastructure. And one of the things I thought that was really interesting after I joined them is that, so there's a technology aspect, there's a finance aspect, just like any companies, it's got a sort of centralized function. But the CEO, whenever things start getting centralized in one area, he says, we are a decentralized company. We are not going to be centralized yet another things within this company. So it's it's also coming from the kind of conscious, sort of like a conscious feeling, conscious thinking within how to keep everything decentralized. I think that's what we do. I mean, yes, it's P2P. It's definitely retail focused, which is another interesting thing. I think that's interesting about the company that is going through a capital raising as we speak. Because when the traditionally, it's sort of like, okay, P2P or B2C, great. But I mean, how really are you going to get my money back on my investment, right? But because we do have a critical mass, and we also have B2C aspect in the sense that there are institutions that are customers of this particular sort of business model, I think it's got a best of both, a best of three different worlds. I think that's what we are kind of taking I think we are kind of taking the best of a little bit of everything.
So pretty much, just to summarize, and Harumi, correct me if I'm wrong. So you guys doing something like this. If I'm a holder of crypto, I can make anywhere from what I understand, 6 to 8% per year per annum. So that's a B2C, P2P solution, very good, servicing a huge variety of users who just would like to hold and ideally hold through some more or less secure wallets. Question is, how do you guarantee that 8%?
Well, first of all, nobody is allowed to guarantee anything, right? So it's really up to this percent, or we always one thing that we say is we will we will return up to 80% of what we make. That now, like, depending on the market, right? I mean, it could be 6%, it could be 10%, who knows? And also depends on the coin that you're dealing with it too. Constantly monitoring and seeing, like, what we can return to the depositors. How do we make sure? I think it's more about how do we make sure that we continue making money off of all these coins that are deposited through our system, and that's all about. That comes down to because of what the crypto world is, what it is, making sure that we don't gamble. Right. None of us take any kind of, like, gambling investment. Is there a risk? Yeah. I mean, whenever you're touching any kind of financial instruments, whether we are talking about dollar, Bitcoin, equity, right? I mean, there's certain risk associated, but the whole thing about the business is the collateralized loan. We take the coins and then we make money using the collateralized loan mainly. That's the bread butter of the company, how the coins are deployed. So the risks are constantly monitored, and I think if somebody calls it monitoring the risk as a sort of as part of the core business sort of function, if you call that centralized, call it centralized. But something has to be provided, added, in order to, I think, continue providing the distributed service. And I think that's the conscious decision that was made, that this is how we are going to make money. This is how we continue paying up to 80% of what we make, instead of like a regular bank out there that pays not even the 1% on their deposits today.
Well, it's going to be negative soon.
Deposits, yeah.
It's going to be negative soon.
Negative. Oh, yeah, right. I mean, I come from Japan. I have been
here we go.
Negative interest for about 25 years. Yeah. So yeah, I know everything about that.
Xenia, Manny,
I know everything about negative interest.
Manny, Xenia, do you guys have anything to add specifically regarding the use cases?
Yeah, so I'm working around a project that's similar to what Brian mentioned, in terms of, there's a lot of focus on opening things up, and there has been for months, but really with a lack of guidance from the CDC and OSHA. So there's a lot of liability that is on employers, and these employers are looking for some type of indemnification waivers, right? If you go to Disney World now, you have to sign a waiver, an indemnification, or Barry's boot camp like gyms. You have to assume the risk. So that's fine, to come up with those waivers or indemnification if you can afford to pay expensive lawyers and you're a big company. But what about if you're a small employer? So I think the need for some type of tool to determine, have your employees been tested? If they test positive, are they quarantined and maintained by a human resources type department, and the intricacies of that and the details need to be determined. But I think if you look back, hindsight's 2020, the reason that we closed down the U.S. government effectively is because we were worried about this massive pandemic. Why? Because we weren't able to separate those who had the disease from those who didn't. And I think any kind of tool right now that, assuming we're able to open things up safely, that can provide some type of assurances, even though the infection rate is quite low, there's still some psychological implications about people, as Brian mentioned, correctly. If people sneeze or look at a co-working space, if I'm in a conference room, Peter, after you, I might not be comfortable in a shared office space. So how do we get people to be comfortable? And I'm working around a project similar to that, in terms of testing, collating the testing, keeping the testing information on the blockchain, and doing it in a way that's cost effective for employers, and that if they were sued potentially by an employer or by a customer, they have some practices and some procedures in terms of creating an overall safe workspace. Without that, I think there's a lot of risk. So I think you'll see more and more of these in terms of larger scale, like what JP Morgan might do, take employees' temperatures and all that. There's going to be some recordation of all that somewhere, probably on the blockchain, hopefully. But again, maintaining everybody's individual privacy, and that's really the tension. But that's along the lines of the project I'm working on.
Xenia?
I more wanted to ask a question because as I was trying to grasp what exactly this transition would mean for enterprises to fully go to blockchain, I came across the comparison of the same enterprises going from on-premise to cloud at some point. And I actually wanted to ask this question. Is this similar? Would something like, because the cloud didn't exist at some point in the past, would it be something that would be as simple or as difficult? Because I'm not aware like how many years it took for big companies to actually fully transition like to the cloud. Are this similar things, or is it something that's completely different because of the core, like of its nature? Maybe it's a question for Radhika, maybe for Brian. Yeah, but I just wanted to ask because this is something that helps me understand this comparison. Is something that, yeah, helps me figure out like how exactly this works.
Happy to jump in. I think, cloud's not going away anytime soon. But I think that and certainly cloud providers are already looking at forms of blockchain, if you will. The thing that's going to be key in blockchain is going to be multi-cloud, right? And so when you have multi-parties and multi-cloud, I mean, I think that's really where the action is going to be in the foreseeable near future and beyond. So cloud's not really going away, but I think that in the future of storage, you speak to data storage, certainly blockchain types of data storage, decentralized data storage is really something that is, I think, still exciting. It's still out there. I don't know that it's necessarily a robust, scalable system yet developed, but I think that that's one of those in the future to come, which I think will be another wave of disruption in the future. So for now, I think we still have what we know as cloud, multi-cloud. I think that there's layers of aspects too that blockchain can provide in terms of privacy and confidentiality, and those are going to be preserved, certainly for enterprise deployment. I don't know if that helps you in any.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And there's one point related to that, but more from slightly different angle that I wanted to make. I came across a Deloitte survey. It was like pre-COVID. I think it was conducted in March. They interviewed over 1,500 top-level executives from enterprises across like various industries. And it was something around 40% of them who said that they already had some pilots, like implementation of blockchain was already in the works. So they were at least exploring this. And I think it's an interesting statistic because compared to last year, I don't remember what exactly the number was in 2018, but there is a dynamic of adoption, at least how, like in companies, like as we see, and in the people's minds, because I think the same survey said that a lot of people are still skeptical, at least half people, they're still kind of skeptical of what role it will play in the future. But we really see some progress here as well. And I just thought that it was really interesting.
I agree with you. I think, corporate and enterprise is already looking at blockchain. I think it comes back to the why. Why blockchain and why now? It's because it's solving some fundamental systemic issues that we've had with legacy systems. Web 2.0 only took us to a point. It went so far. And we really fulfilled the outer limits of what that potential has been, because at the end of the day, it's still TCP/IP based, and that's a communication protocol. So I think that, we're looking at some transformative elements about the why of blockchain. And I think all enterprises really are looking at this in various levels of adoption and acceleration, if you will. And in certain areas, I think there's been some faster acceleration because the forces in the market, in the systems, in the industries, with regulatory bodies, as I mentioned previously, has also spurred that acceleration to happen a lot quicker. So in pharma, for example, you're seeing a higher level of commitment toward the technology like blockchain because it's going to solve some fundamental issues that they've been grappling with for a very long time.
Brian, do you have anything to add on top of clouds? Clouds versus hardware, because you guys do it the right way, it seems like, and clouds is a very way. Good.
It's a very cloudy thing. Yeah, it's not going away anytime soon. That's become people are comfortable with that. They understand that it is a safe environment, and there's going to be a methodical transition to what that next layer of moving data, where it's stored, how it's encrypted, and the protection around it. But I do believe the next movement is the multi-cloud environment. And what we do with we push data to the cloud, but it's only to the owner of that data. We do not sell data to any third parties or advertisers. It's companies that want to know where their assets are, that sit on our blockchain. They want to unlock scooters or bikes. And those tiny bits of micro data is what we move around from device to device, and we do need the cloud to be able to push that up into a secure environment for the owner of that data to access.
I think you're breaking up a little bit. Your visual looks still pretty cool, but your audio, I think, breaks up a little bit. Hopefully that's just not me. Hopefully that's not my Wi-Fi. But we heard you. So when it comes down to cloud, multi-cloud solutions, etc., my personal opinion before I jump to the next question, it is an easy non-solution. It's yet another BS solution to the real issue, because once everything's on the cloud,
I'm good.
say Amazon or IBM, the trust disappears immediately, because now that trust element is directly onto those companies. And no matter what those companies, what kind of regulations these companies have to abide by, we all realize that these companies will control all the data, and the level of trust is not going to increase. So let's do the next question. The next question is from all the practitioners, which applies to all of you. Insights. So you guys work with businesses, you guys work with governments. What are some insights and what are some issues that you've seen that prevented those organizations from going the right way, from doing it the right way? Say the right way is your way, whatever you guys think is the right way.
I can start with a good example. I'm from Russia, Moscow. And when Russia tested blockchain for blockchain-based elections, it was like they said it was a successful use case. But I would say that if we take a look at today's amendments to the Constitution that you have to go and vote for right now, it's not on blockchain this time, but there are, I have seen pictures of the new books with new constitution already printed and in stores. So it doesn't matter if you vote or not. It's like the decision was already made for you. It's a little bit of a political point, but I think it shows really, and it's a whole separate questions, but as Peter mentioned, governments. I think when the system doesn't work on itself, blockchain won't help make it efficient. That's just one thing I wanted to mention. And on a totally unrelated note, energy market and its applications for blockchain in there. I have just recently, I think it was today or yesterday, read about Korea testing enterprise blockchain for bid evaluation system. And I think it's interesting to see how Korea has had a lot of innovation in this space. So this is just like second thing on the level of the entire country, testing this technology for energy market. I just thought that this was really interesting point. So yeah, just these two things that first come to mind.
Just to make sure we're talking about South Korea, everybody, that was a funny joke. All right, so let's proceed with insights, barriers. What are you guys seeing when speaking to organizations that prevents you guys from introducing the proper solutions? Brian? Maybe.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay before I go in?
Your video still looks great.
Okay, good. So the biggest thing I think is education. You have a lot of people that are leading these companies that are seasoned. I don't want to use the word older, but they're from another generation, and anybody that doesn't understand something, they're immediately afraid of it. That's just human nature. But if you're going to do it, you got to do it 100% correctly. It's like hiring a bad contractor. Your roof's going to leak. So you better be sure that when you go into this environment, you have the right architecture, you hire the right CTO or the right firm to properly guide you through the process, and you will benefit your organization if you do it correctly. You can't be half pregnant. I never suggest anybody just do it just for the hell of it. Yeah, you need to do it right. You need to do it correctly. And if you don't understand it, just put your pride away. This is a brand new world. 90% of the people don't understand what this is. It's okay not to understand it. and build a team around you to help you be in the right place and have the right tools and resources to successfully add this into your enterprise or into your government solutions.
Anybody else? Radhika? We need if possible specifics. Give us.
I'll just add to that. Sure. Well, for the education side, I couldn't agree more, Brian. It's one of the reasons why my co-author and I wrote the book Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived, because we saw a big need for that education to be readily accessible everywhere to anyone. The second point is, I think, some of the more challenging aspects to blockchain are not so much even the technology, but the governance aspect. I can't even underscore enough the issues of governance come up time and time again. At the end of the day, governance is, related to humans. And so when you have human beings involved with the governance frameworks, you're going to have some issues. There's going to be disagreements. There's going to be trying to figure things out kind of a mentality. We're still in early days on that in terms of figuring out the right kinds of frameworks, I think. But I think that the hope is there because we've got some great networks and consortia already deployed, some great examples we can look to of success stories in terms of how they're approaching these governance models. And I think that those are going to lead the way in terms of raising awareness, if you will, spurring entire innovation in industries like food and ag, like supply chain, like pharma, like healthcare, even relating to HIPAA, because we all know that HIPAA went and took it so far. HIPAA focuses on privacy, but really missed the boat on identity. And so when you talk about digital identity, when you talk about self-sovereign identity, DID-based, that's really something that's going to game change in healthcare, for example. So I think that education is going to be important, but also the right governance frameworks. Those are the challenges that we're dealing with that also I think will open the roads to greater growth and adoption. But we're already seeing, I think, some really great promising strides in the adoption area compared to last year.
Let me jump in. I think a lot of it, I would agree with what Brian mentioned is, I think I'm saying that a lot. I don't know why I'm agreeing with Brian so much.
Yeah, we're gonna get along well. This is working out.
There you go. Hired. I think a lot of it is generational. I actually participated in a panel today that Gary V did, and it was about Generation Z. And it opened up my eyes in terms of the way they think, how they're really into technology, multimedia. I mean, they effectively don't watch terrestrial TV. Everything is videos. Everything is YouTube, right? So I think there's some reluctance at the CEO level, the CFO level, the C-suite to embrace blockchain. I also think that COVID exposed vulnerabilities in our world, in particular in the US, right? One is because schools are closed, children are learning remotely. There's so many children that don't have access to Wi-Fi. In New York City, for example, 1.1 million children are receive some type of laptop or some type of device, right? Some iPad to for them to use with the remote learning. They don't have Wi-Fi. I mean, I never thought about it. It's a terrible problem that we have. Also, in terms of the stimulus checks, the $1,200 stimulus checks, a lot of people didn't receive them because they're unbanked. Again, we're not as wired as we think, right? I mean, when we're thinking about a pandemic, you watch Bill Gates' speech about the pandemic and talking about, a couple of years ago, I guess he did it in 2015 in Africa. And the whole interesting aspect was some kind of virus in a country that doesn't have the infrastructure, in medicine and science and technology, but the United States does, right? Or Europe does. And look at how Corona exposed those vulnerabilities. So I think it's a bit of a push and a pull in terms of what is, as I said earlier, what's motivating, what's the incentive. I think right now we see what a lot of the protests right now for social justice, the peaceful protests, things can change quickly. Governments are acting super quick because they realize that things shouldn't be the way they are, and people want change. Change is coming, and change has been, affected by these governments very, very quickly. So I think, again, the government's just kind of been sitting on their hands for many years, and I'm not being critical of government, I'm just being objective. We're too big in this country, and I think it's slower in terms of embracing technology and embracing blockchain than it should have been. But I think generationally, the next generation, I think we'll see a lot of strides in it.
So far the barriers is lack of education, potentially too large size of structures that must be optimized. What are some other barriers that you guys seen so far? So far, only two that you guys mentioned. Governance. 3. Need more.
I'd say capital or an allocation of capital. This type of thing's never been budgeted in anybody's pro formas. So if they're going to go and put money towards it, if they go too small, then they miss the boat. If they go too big, then they're in trouble. So again, whoever's allocating capital towards this, they kind of have the hardest job. They got to hit it right and make sure that they always support it.
So I'll add another one, Peter, and that's mindset. I think a lot of the transition to blockchain requires a new mindset. It's a different spirit. It's a different ethos. Sharing data rather than always competing. So that's co-opetition word that keeps coming up over and over and a little bit overused, but it is there for a reason. And I think this whole idea of where we can share rather than where we can always compete. I think competition is really necessary in healthy market growth, but at the same time, finding out where you can differentiate and that competitive nature, that will never go away. But I think where we can share and bring the transparency and auditability and accountability for our actions, I think on an ethical side, that's a mindset shift.
So couple of cultural and demographic pretty much shifts, capital, and lack of education. That's so far. So that's why we are all screwed right now and cannot fix Corona. Great.
No, I do think though, Peter, that this is not what I would have said if I'm the first one to answer this particular question. But I do think that because everything gets, the stories gets told so quick, traditionally innovation, right? It took years for anything to develop. I mean, I don't know, if we're talking about the internet, artificial intelligence, even space technology, I mean, they were actually they existed since 50s, and only in this century, they are all blossoming. Blockchain just was born 11 years ago, really, for all practical purpose. And how much of a chance are we actually giving it before we say we are screwed, this is not successful, this is too difficult to use, we can't find the right usage? So I do think that, along with everything else that I would have also said all these named, like education, governance, all these things ahead of this. But I do think that time, how quickly people hear about things is actually really kind of in a way working against us, because we also have become so fast to judge if this is a good stuff or bad stuff for us.
Yeah. And Peter, also I throw in there, the reality is you can't manipulate it. So you got a lot of people that need to manipulate what's going on inside their house to make sure that their funding keeps coming in. And that's just the world we live in. And if you were to move over to this type of environment, you can't operate like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Adding quickly to what Harumi was talking about, and I agree with you, emerging technologies do take time to develop. How quickly we forget. I think that, if we're looking at the internet, for example, as technology, we don't talk about internet as a technology anymore. We just do things, we use things, we interact, we do whatever we do. It's part of our life. We never talk about API calls we're making. We don't talk about the underlying technology to email anymore. So, there will come a time when we don't refer to this as blockchain technology. It is something that is going to generate a certain value and a certain result and an ROI that is going to drive adoption, and people are going to use it because it's necessary to solve a particular problem that can't be solved any other way. So I think that I look at that fundamentally as a technology. This is where the education needs to come about, because people think about blockchain and say, is that Bitcoin? Is that this? Is that that? There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and let's not forget it's the underlying technology that brings so many useful aspects to what we need to do.
Yeah, I mean, as a funny story, an hour ago, I needed to transfer a domain name from one provider to another. Yeah, that was very difficult, extremely. So I think, Radhika, I'll just have to say it. Internet is still extremely difficult. There are 2 or 3 things that are pretty much optimized. One of them is email, another one is Angry Birds, and then the rest is extremely difficult. It took me like an hour or 2 to figure out exactly how to transfer the domain, and I'm not sure if it's still transferred. I need to talk to the support team right after this. Let's do. How are you guys doing so far? Is it going the right way? The crowd, please ask your questions in the chat. Maybe hopefully, no cursing. We'll ask you a question. Let's do this. Catalyst for blockchain adoption. So Corona happened, riots happened, everything happened. Financial disaster is about to happen based on what some people are saying. And there's no blockchain. There's Bitcoin, there's a little bit of Ethereum, and there's no blockchain. So what is the catalyst that the world needs for blockchain to really strive?
I disagree with that statement completely. If you look at large organizations, Walmart, central banks, for heaven's sake, that are all adopting blockchain, you can't say that blockchain isn't here. I think that's a misconception. Bitcoin is not blockchain. Bitcoin is an application of blockchain. It's, internet to email as, basically blockchain is to Bitcoin, for example. So I think it's an application, and I think everybody's heard about the application. I think blockchain is here. It's already here. It's being adopted across the board by large enterprises. Back to the healthcare component, since this panel is about healthcare, you've got organizations that are running like 50 million transactions already in the network, and so per day. And so if you're really looking at volume, you're looking at robustness, you're looking at scalability, you're looking at throughput, a lot of these things have already been deployed and are being used actively and are being quite successful at it. So I think blockchain is already here. I certainly think that it can grow and accelerate in adoption much better. And I think that we're still going along that path to adoption in varying degrees across industries, but it's already here. So I disagree with your statement, Peter.
That's fine.
I'm gonna jump in quickly. I think what I'd love to see would be competition, right? So in my world, there was a lot of different countries that were taking a lead with regard to cryptocurrency, Bermuda, digital assets, in terms of coming up with really progressive regulations. Let's say, look at Wyoming, great state to do crypto and blockchain, but not the whole United States. So it's limited to Wyoming, which is a great state. And Caitlin Long has done a tremendous job with the state and the legislature. So I thought it'd be a competitive thing. Malta, Bermuda, Gibraltar. And I thought that was going to really catch fire in terms of the United States was losing out competitively to smaller countries that I call flat, meaning that they have much less population, and it's easier for them to promulgate regulation and enact laws. We have just a multiplexity of regulators. I call the alphabet super regulators, banking, securities, whatever, financial services, around medical, and we have the multiplexity of federal and state and all these different regimes. So I think it makes it super difficult or more difficult. Unfortunately, I don't see that competitive fire, that competitive energy has really taken a spark in the U.S. And
in the U.S.
I thought Trump would jump on that and waving a flag like we don't want to lose out to one of these countries, but it just really hasn't caught fire, unfortunately.
I would disagree with that because competition, of course, like it's a driver, it's a catalyst in a lot of ways. But I believe that we first and foremost need some specific standard. We need to agree on a bunch of things before we can move forward and see the widespread adoption, because it's harder to regulate. Like, at least, of course, there won't be just like one single blockchain like for enterprises and that's it. But still, like when we have standards and understanding from a lot of different perspectives how things work, and we come together as an industry and decide a bunch of things, that I think would be one of the most important things to move us forward. But I don't think it's likely to happen like in the next year or two. I think such things, they do take longer. But I think that it's not that it's like an opposing thing to competition, but it's something like we need to be competitive to grow, but still we need to agree on a bunch of things to help each other grow.
I'll agree with one point that you mentioned, Xenia. I think that on the subject of industries adopting this technology, I think We've already seen that across the pharma sector, for example. This is global. You've got global consortia that are based here in the US, as well as Europe, for example. There are global ecosystems that are far more ahead of the US, just from a broad perspective. Europe and China, for example, being much more ahead in this regard than the US, for example. But I would say that when it comes to industries, we are seeing particular sectors like pharma, for example, really adopting this technology because, like I said, it solves a fundamental issue. It solves systemic issues that legacy systems can't solve. And so I think from an adoption standpoint, there is this co-opetition spirit already taking place. These are large pharma manufacturers that ordinarily compete with each other, but are coming together in very innovative ways across consortia because they see the value of sharing certain data. So in drug development, for example, in Europe, there is Melody, which is the drug development consortium that has all of the major partners, private and public, involved in this effort. And it's a federated-based system. So, without divulging private data, confidential data, sort of stores that each of the pharma manufacturers might have or other entities might have, they're able to share weighted results of those and be able to share that data across the consortium so that they can actually better develop the drug or accelerate drug discovery, for example. I think these innovative models are already being adopted, and I think that's really encouraging. So I think from an adoption standpoint, I think there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel.
Optimistic views so far? Positive views? Brian? Harumi?
Yeah,
Harumi?
actually, go ahead, Harumi.
I think both sides are saying I think it's the right thing that both sides are saying. But I think, Peter, to go back to your original question, I think we're talking about the true sort of mass adoption where like everybody with or without knowing what they're using that's underneath that is actually running the either application or the technology, whatever it is. How do we get there? And then Radhika, to use some of the examples that you were using, the healthcare system came up with some system that uses a blockchain that's because that's only the way that can solve the legacy problems that exist, right? But if you, for example, like I think on that side, solution provider side, I think, yes, I agree with you that it's adopted and it's here to stay. I think the question is going to be those people who are actually dealing with that legacy problems in the day in, day out, whether we're talking about healthcare administrative people or, the people who use the end system. How do we make sure that the best system that we are developing in the economy right now actually reach the problem whose problem really needs to be solved? And then I think that there's always a gap. It's a classic product management problem, right? There's a problem. There's something that we perceive as a problem. There's a way we can solve the problem. Is it really going to be adopted? Do we have to force the solution on them? Do we have to take away the current solution that they're using today and then literally physically replace it? Or do we actually go around educate and then educate and then wait for 5 years until people realize that it's a problem, right?
Well, nobody educated anybody to play Angry Birds, right? And to your point, absolutely. To your point, absolutely. Yeah. We're talking about mass adoption. We're not talking about any enterprise solution must, at the end of the day, if it's a proper enterprise solution, must include the end user. And in the most cases, the end user is us. And if it's not including us, that's a crappy enterprise solution that should not be existing in the first place. And it's probably using Hyperledger or some other private permission systems. And that's why there's no innovation, because those private permission systems are just not scalable enough from the perspective of those users to ever be possible. Radhika, and then Brian.
I'll disagree with that really quite strongly. I mean, I'm fairly knowledgeable on permission systems and the scalability that we've achieved in enterprise systems that are permissioned are well proven. I'd challenge any permissionless system to say there's handling 50 million transactions of health records per day. Just, that's already been achieved. To Harumi's point, I think in healthcare, for example, we are seeing, for example, Burst IQ is a really innovative blockchain company. It's working with Intermountain, which is a group of hospitals in a network in Utah, 22 hospitals. And they're proving out tremendous successes with their platform already. And it is not only an enterprise-focused system, but it's also a consumer-focused system. So I think that when it comes to data management, when it comes to that product management aspect that you referred to, Harumi, I couldn't agree with you more, but I also see some really bright lights in terms of innovative blockchain companies that are already achieving and proving out sort of that ROI and saying, why would a 22 hospital system be so excited about working with their system? The reason is that the ROI has already been proven, right? And they're excited about that. And they're excited to see how healthcare data across these 22 hospitals can actually be shared, is actually one.
How many transactions have been done amongst those 22 hospitals per day? Talking about
I don't know about specifically the transactions per day on those hospitals, but I can tell you Change Healthcare is a blockchain-based, is using a blockchain-based system that is processing 50 million transactions per day.
50?
50.
And how many participants are in the consortium?
This is Change Healthcare, right? I mean, they're like dealing with multiple vendors, multiple people. I don't know exactly how many end users are in the system, but you're talking about 50 million transactions per day in health records. That's a lot. So I think that in terms of scalable systems, we've already seen some measure of success in that. So I think that it's not like it's still experimental and it's out there and it's pilots and it's small little projects that are tucked away somewhere. I think we're seeing some very robust enterprise grade systems that have already proven the sufficient amount of scalability and throughput. And there's always room for growth. When we first started writing the book, Change Healthcare was doing 30 million. By the time we finished writing the book, they were doing 50 million. So I think that there's already great strides that are being made in certain sectors already. So, and I think these are permission systems. And I think the beauty of permission systems is because there are trusted nodes on the system, you're able to move that data in a particular way much faster than you would in a permissionless system, because just the architecture is different and the needs are different. If you have to do something that is that's only consumer facing, and you have to build something that is going to be millions and millions and millions and millions of users, well, maybe that has to be a permissionless system on that side, but then it has to be backed up by something else that's going to be able to handle the throughput, which is perhaps a permission system on the back end. So again, these hybrid systems are already sort of in play and have been, I think, proven. So that's the exciting news.
Yeah, I just checked out the Change Healthcare is using Hyperledger Fabric. I need to dive deeper into this. Is the 50 million claim really true? Because this is the first time that I've heard Hyperledger Fabric projects have anything that significant. Brian?
Yeah, if you want to talk about the end consumer, the way I always look at everything that we do, it just has to be a seamless interaction. They can't even know what's happening. Nodal, for example, works in the background. Our other holding, SonoCoin, is the world's first audible blockchain, and we're moving data securely through sound. I look at it as in a different aspect than in the panel, and I agree a lot with Manny said, and that's not just returning the favor, pal. I actually agree with a lot that you said before. The situation is I always feel it's about the banking mechanism. I think healthcare and finance are going to be the leading plays to get mass adoption of anything. And after that, people know that they can bank their money or they can convert their digital assets to some sort of other currency. Until that is really a universal environment where people understand it, they can flip open their phone and do that exchange and go buy lettuce with it at the supermarket. You're never going to see giant mass adoption as to what you're saying until people understand it and can use it and it's seamless. Like the near field credit card, they just touch their merchant credit card processing. I was in Europe 10 years. They were doing that prior than it was in the US. Yeah. So there's so many things that there's just too many different conversations going on around the world, and people are focusing on too many different things at once. I'm a big believer, do one thing, knock it out of the park and crush it and rinse and repeat. So I think in order for this to really hit where it needs to hit, the banks got to get online with this. And the healthcare play, all those systems need to talk with each other, understand on a universal platform, a secure universal platform. And the end consumer is experiencing it without doing anything. I think that's the only way I see mass adoption right now, until people are properly educated on how to handle this type of technology and what that means to their normal life.
I agree with you, Brian. I think that, on the food side, since all of us are so concerned, or more increasingly, I guess, increasingly concerned about where our food comes from, what we're eating. Is it organic? Is it fair trade? Is it whatever, right? And so to be able to, and is it safe? So on the subject of food contamination, the reason the FDA has gotten so behind this and is going full force on this is because of that. I mean, each food contamination incident costs over $100 million per incident because, of spoilage, of bad food, of people being hospitalized or falling ill. There's many, many different ramifications. And so from a safety perspective, it's really, really important that we get that right. So, to the point of a consumer being able to walk up with an app and say, well, do I know where this piece of lettuce, head of lettuce comes from? They're already doing that, right? And so in Europe, there's Carrefour, which launched its blockchain-based app, and consumers were able to walk up to chicken, find out where the chicken was grown or whatever, what farm it came from. And they saw actually an uptick of 30% in revenues for those products where you could actually show the traceability based on blockchain. I think that's a big positive. Consumers want to know where their food comes from. Walmart is getting behind this. They required that all of their leafy green suppliers be compliant with blockchain-based systems at the end of last year, right? And so that we're already seeing that happening. And Walmart is planning a massive expansion of that beyond just leafy greens. Obviously, leafy greens come into the news more often than others because of the E. coli incidents of romaine lettuce or spinach or what have you. But I think that all of these health-related safety risks, these benefits that we as consumers can derive because we know the origin, the provenance of a particular product, or whether the product was manufactured in the right way, what farm it was harvested on, what suppliers touched it. These are all things that we care about, and I think we're going to be moving into that conscious consumerism more and more. And so I couldn't be more excited in terms of what the opportunities for blockchain are in specific areas like food and ag.
One of the areas where I feel like we really missed a ripe opportunity, and we talked about this a bit earlier, is data ownership. People used to get really pissed off about, okay, I own my data and all these companies are selling my data. Why am I not getting my fair share of the pie? And why are you using my image and all that? And it seemed to die down, and I think that blockchain's a great solution to that problem in terms of, if from a privacy perspective, Facebook doesn't have the rights to use my data, but because they're private companies, it's in their terms of service. And if I don't agree, I'm not on Facebook. And the same thing with Twitter and YouTube and all that. So these companies have grown so large, and the focus from the government is now on taking away Section 230 immunities from Twitter in terms of, immunities from litigation and making it more like publishers in a newspaper. Although I understand it's all political, but the focus to me should be on data. I should own my data. We all should own our own data and have control of it, what's done with that data. And if we make money from it, as marginal as it may be, wonderful. But we should own our data. We have no privacy, and we seem to be okay with that. And that's really disturbing to me as the world kind of gets chaotic. I always think, what happens if you have this rogue employee who works for, some internet service provider or whatever, and they just hack into your email because they don't like you, or they just swap your SIM card and dump all your data, sell it on a dark web. What protections are there in place? The privacy laws and the regulations, Telecommunications Act, were enacted in 1996. I used to have I'm old enough to have the old Motorola flip phone, with the big brick that would die like in 10 minutes. People didn't contemplate using your phone for banking and all these transactions. We've given up on that. We've given up on our privacy and our data. And I think if we start to get interested in that again, and there's an interest in protecting our privacy and our data, that's a perfect opportunity to use blockchain to enable that to happen.
Manny, I agree with you. Data ownership is really, really critical. Data sovereignty and DID, right, decentralized de-identifiers, these are really, really important components. And to the point of regulations again and policy and the reasons why that can be very, very beneficial if it's done the right way. I'm actually really happy to be in California because we've got CCPA. CCPA was the answer to lack of GDPR-like regulations or policies here in the United States. And so Senator Bob Hertzberg is in the California GovOps Blockchain Working Group, which I'm a member of. And the reason why he co-authored the CCPA was because there was a need for that. The issues around privacy in the US have always been really difficult because we have federal level sort of privacy policies, but it's about government intrusion on privacy. It's not about private sector intrusion on privacy. And so I think that as we go forward and we've got a post-COVID world where Brian, you're talking about nodal privacy protecting contact tracing or verifiable credentials based on blockchain because we need to know who's had COVID or not, or who's been tested or not, or who's had the vaccine or not. I mean, these are all things that we absolutely need to do to reintegrate ourselves in a going forward mechanism. But at the same time, we need to be able to preserve privacy. We need to be able to preserve who we are, who our identities are. We need to protect that. So I couldn't agree with you more. It is absolutely the crucial point of data ownership and data sovereignty.
Brian, Xenia, Harumi, do you guys have anything to add? I think we'll be wrapping up after this. So if you guys have any final remarks as well?
Actually, I wanted to say that regarding, sorry, Harumi, go ahead. Okay. I just wanted to say that, Peter, you mentioned interview with Jeffrey Wernick that you had the other day. And I think for everyone who wants to dive deeper into the topic of privacy, maybe they should watch this interview because this is one of the most knowledgeable people I know in this space. He has everything, every component of the issue, especially how it works in the US. So I think, I recommend watching Jeffrey Wernick's videos and maybe especially the one with Peter.
Well, you guys also did interviews. When preparing for the interviews, I've been watching and I researched and I saw your interviews and I was actually watching them to not ask the same questions. Harumi?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I also am of the opinion that, the data protection, privacy protection, very important aspect of our lives. I mean, let's forget about the technology. It's a very important part of our lives. And something that the blockchain can address very well. I do think the challenge is that actually when I was a part of a artificial intelligence panel a little bit while ago, and I actually took the poll of a room, just to get the temperature of how many of you log in to everything using a Facebook account, right? And actually all but two, and one of these two being me, right, raised hand and said, I really use the Facebook account to log in everything. And then I said, do you know what you might be giving up by doing that? And actually the response I got was, why don't you? So that's the kind of culture where we are kind of shifting from what am I doing with my data? What does that mean to give up all this one for nothing, right? From sort of I have mine, what belongs to me is mine, and then it doesn't belong to anybody else. If somebody wants it, they have to pay a heck of a lot of money to buy it off of me, right? That's if I decide to sell a part of it. So I think that sort of fundamental shift of what is mine, what is theirs, I think really changed because of all this internet and social media. So before this kind of solution actually can come in as one of the mainstream use of blockchain, I think we might have to gauge where everybody's sort of thought about that is to talk about the mass adoption, Peter.
Yeah, we got distracted. We got distracted by Angry Birds and no incentives, and we just said, screw it. I love Facebook. Take my data. What can be worse? Oh, my real estate price is going up. Brian?
I would just add, I saw a really interesting statistic on the contact tracing app, for example. 7 out of 10 Americans wouldn't download it. And I actually get that. I understand that. I mean, you turn on the news, you're tracking you. You're going to kill me if I have a disease or whatever the case may be. That's why it's so important to do it at the workplace and then allow that to be how people can start to experience how important technology is, how important blockchain is, what you're actually doing and contributing to. Let's just talk about infectious diseases. If you can identify, contain, and stop the spread of this, maybe, just maybe, the world wouldn't shut down for 3 months again in the future. And then maybe you won't have to be afraid as hell of a second wave or a third wave or a fourth wave, or however far they take this. And it's the first time in history where you quarantine the healthy. People have no idea what that even means. Why are you putting me in a box? I'm not sick. So it's so important to utilize this type of blockchain technology, the cryptocurrencies, everything around it. I think the workplace and the school environment is going to what allows for it to become, I guess, a non-concern to the average user. And we believe that our solution is going to be able to provide the idea that, hey, this is really important, especially as it relates to healthcare and pandemics, because that's what we have to face now.
Manny, and then I'll wrap it up. Let's go.
Yeah, I'll leave you with this story. So I got into this heated discussion with a friend of mine who was vehemently, passionately against contact tracing, but was also trying to sell me on drones. So these drones are essentially monitoring people's breathing patterns, if they're coughing. I mean, they have facial recognition, completely violating your Fourth Amendment rights. But yet this person was arguing there's no way I want anybody to know anything about me with contact tracing. And I'm like, that is the most inconsistent argument in the world. But you're okay with drones. I mean, think about that. But that's the nature of the world we're in, right? So we're kind of, we're halfway in and halfway out. And that's why we're not a unified front. And I think, unfortunately, hopefully lessons learned from COVID, we will make sure we have a more robust way of handling crises and utilizing crisis management. But I thought that was an interesting story to share with you in terms of kind of, some inconsistencies out there in terms of drones are okay, but contact tracing not.
I think this generation, our generation, we just are so easy to manipulate. We're not ready for this loads of data, and whoever is producing that, aka media, is taking advantage of this. And the best way to heal this and to debate, to pretty much battle that, is to build communities, educated communities that are aware of what is going on, and those communities must be self-reliable, self-responsible, etc., etc., etc. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It was a great panel. I was trying to be as challenging as possible. Hopefully, all good. So need to say thank you to Nick Spanos, Scott, Eric, and Anna Ginsberg. These guys are in New York City. Guys, hi. And there's also Erica, who is in Miami, and she's not flying to New York City yet. The NYC, if you guys are in New York, right? Right now it sounds very bad. NYC Bitcoin Center and NYC Blockchain Center are reopening in the next couple of weeks. They are planning to throw some kind of party with 6 feet social distancing and masks and whatever. There's probably going to be some healing alcohol as well. They said it's going to be a very small party, but I know those guys. It's going to be a very good party. So thank you so much. Any last words before we completely shut up? Radhika, you want to say something?
Thanks all for a great discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Stay safe.
Appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Manny, what's up?